far right lane on Rockville Pike, finally getting it, because it's a 3-lane
Wow.
road, finally getting it cleared, because it would just narrow out of nowhere all of a sudden. You know, it's been interesting.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's virtual program, Legacy Leadership Planning for the Future Today, with Don Tebbe and Ginna Goodenow. I am Brittany Spillman, and I have the privilege of serving as the director of the Cary Center Community and Collegiate Programs. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsors who make programs like this possible. Our presenting sponsor for today is the Walker Area Community Foundation, a nonprofit grant-making organization that works every day to build permanent resources, spark meaningful conversations, inspire action, and empower partners to make a difference. We are so grateful to our community and collegiate program sponsors, Auburn University Outreach, the Kim and Tim Hudson Endowed Fund for Excellence, Auburn University Outreach Office of Public Service, the Drummond Thorne Stooks Endowed Fund for Excellence, and a community service grant made possible by State Representative Joe Lovern. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Don Tebbe is a leadership succession consultant and author of Chief Executive Transitions, How to Hire and Support a Nonprofit CEO, and the Nonprofit CEO Succession Roadmap, your guide for the journey to life's next chapter. As a former nonprofit executive director and 5-time interim CEO, he has experienced executive succession and transitions firsthand. Since starting his consulting practice in 1993, he has helped hundreds of nonprofit leaders plan for leadership succession and manage turnover in their chief executive position. Ginna Goodenow is the CEO and founder of Dragonfly Central Incorporated, a national nonprofit consulting firm she launched in 2004. For more than 2 decades, she has advised nonprofit organizations on executive search, leadership transitions, succession planning, and organizational stability. Ginna has served and lead consultant on nearly 600 executive transition and search engagements, and has worked with organizations ranging from emerging startups to global institutions. Through her work, she has partnered closely with thousands of nonprofit leaders navigating change, growth, and transformation across a wide range of missions, including health equity, disability services, housing and homelessness, racial and social justice, education, environmental protection, and human and civil rights. Her work is grounded in deep sector knowledge and a practical understanding of what nonprofit leaders need to succeed during the moments of transition. Please join me in welcoming Don and Ginna.
Thank you, Brittany, for that wonderful introduction. And we look forward to today's program. And if I can get my slides to move here. There we go. So this program is going to be a little bit different than maybe some training programs that you've been involved in. Really, what we wanted to do is to equip board members and executives with a practical approach to executive succession and really underscore the idea that it is, and I'm talking over Ginna. Ginna, you were supposed to do this.
It's
Sorry,
okay.
folks.
You just go right on ahead. You're doing great.
I'm so eager. I'm so eager.
It's really okay.
Green slides are Ginna, blue slides are Don. Okay, I'm clear now. So with that great start, take it away, Ginna.
So, yes, what we're talking about here is the purpose for today is so that you guys can understand succession as a core system. It's a governance system, reduces the risk, preserves momentum, it strengthens long-term organizational performance. I finished.
Okay. Yeah, it really grows out of some work that Mandy Stewart at NC State and I did. We together wrote a paper and did a piece at a research conference, our Nova Research Conference, really looking at the gap between practice and and theory about nonprofit succession, and we interviewed a number of practitioners around the country, and basically the conclusion was that boards oftentimes see transition as sort of like uh, a necessary thing to do, happens periodically, and so it's not something that really is core to the organization's governance system. And really like to dispel that notion and really underscore the idea that this is really, uh, you know, something that the boards really need to incorporate as a natural part of their governance and their management system. So what we're presenting today is our notions about how to systematize succession planning and what the various tools are for that system. And so obviously the whole idea here is to reduce the risk and improve outcomes when leadership occurs, because it is a disruption to the organization's operations. There's no question about that. It's just a question of how much of a disruption there is. And what we're trying to do with this systemic approach is to minimize that disruption.
So we
Jen?
have what are considered the core whys, and we're going to be asking you all to just a few people to volunteer to say, why are you here? Why this session? And why now, particularly?
So anybody want to pop in with that?
And Brittany, you can see all of them. I don't think we can.
Y'all are welcome to unmute. That may be a little bit quicker than trying to
Sure.
type it in the chat.
Yeah.
I'll just chime in. I'm off camera because I am eating my lunch currently. But I am on this session because I am the only employee of our nonprofit. And so I'm really interested to see what succession looks like, planning looks like, what good looks like, but also have some questions about how that happens as a one employee shop. Thank you.
Great.
I'm Fran Lamartine. Oops.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Fran.
Thank you. I'm Fran Lamartina. I am in Dothan, Alabama, and Brittany, I'll be seeing you on March 4th. I've been working in the nonprofit space, mostly out of Atlanta, for the last 25 years, but I work with all sectors. But down here in Dothan, Alabama, I am doing a lot of work for a foundation that supports the nonprofits in the area. So this is my first experience with Auburn at this program, and I'm excited to be here.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else?
I was jumping in real quick. My name's Veronica McGee, and I chiming in on what our first participant mentioned. I'm a one-person employee operation, also a nonprofit. We are an emerging nonprofit. We're 2 years in, and we're in Birmingham, Alabama. So I was also referred to this program as a good space to learn a lot, and it's also my first time to be joining Auburn. So excited to be here.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Anyone else? If not, we'll feel free to put your
Michael
questions in
looks
the
like
chat.
is I think there's some Mikhail. Is that how you say it? Yeah, you're muted still. I can see that you want to talk, but you're still muted. Uh-oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, okay. I'm Mike Lewis. I'm in Selma, Alabama. I'm a alumni of Auburn, class of 74, but I'm leading a nonprofit in Selma called Lighting Selma. We're lighting the Eben Pettus Bridge. And so we're just trying to increase our board and do things properly as we build for the future, because we'll not only be lighting the bridge, but also maintaining it. So it'll be a long-term project. Thanks for this program. I'm looking forward to listening today.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And thanks all of you for the work that you're doing. that's one of the things that's so gratifying about working in the nonprofit world is just getting to know people's missions and, with their commitment to it, so forth. So, and obviously our aim is to help you preserve that mission work, that mission impact. The core objectives for this program today really is we really want to underscore that it's a critical governance responsibility and that transitions happen episodically. And that kind of leads us to think that, well, we don't need to worry about succession planning because that's off in the future. No, it really is an opportunity to take a systemic approach that's also going to have the benefit of sustaining your organization beyond the succession work. And so we're going to introduce a practical framework that really covers the 4 stages of the succession cycle. We're going to talk about the timeline, the tools, the people and roles within that. And then we're going to discuss the what and the why and the when of the core succession tools. And so we're going to be really talking, first of all, kind of like the why of succession planning and some of the opportunities. And then we're going to cover the 4 succession steps or phases in the succession cycle. And then we're going to talk about the tools that are related to those 4 stages. And we're also going to encourage you to ask questions, and we really want to try and help you identify the next actions that are appropriate for your organization. So this isn't just a program that you attended and, get the information gets shelved, but really see this as an opportunity to take a step forward towards furthering your organization's sustainability. So first of all, let's define what we mean by succession planning, because different folks have different ideas. If you ask corporate folks about what they think succession planning is, well, they think it's all about leader development, about identifying high potential people, grooming them, supporting them, moving them around, giving them various experiences, and eventually moving them up in the organization. Um, a lot of nonprofits think it's solely about insurance policy, having a backup plan for your executive when your executive is absent. And what we're saying is it's those things and. So it's really about the availability, continuity, and systematic development of your organization's leadership talent. Availability, ensuring that there's people available to back up critical positions, but also availability to move up into roles. And continuity, obviously, some planning to ensure the continuity of leadership, backup plans, and so forth. And then appropriate development. And what we mean by appropriate development is appropriate for your organization. And we're going to present a tool later or a framework that you can use regardless of size, whether you're one person shop or a global institution, you can use this. And so we're going to divide these tools up into 2 categories. Things that we call always on tools, something that you really should have in place. And that's, sustainability planning, what we call succession essentials, which is a backup plan and a board adopted policy, and leader development tools. And then tools that are really more geared toward the transition time and departure defined planning, executive transition management, and onboarding and integration planning. And this will mean a lot more to you when we get into this, because we're actually going to talk about each of these tools. We want to kind of frame this up. Here's succession planning. It's a very encompassing look at organizational leadership. And here are the tool sets that we're going to be discussing here. So, Ginna.
Yes. So first, we're going to talk about the why. Why executive succession is a governance responsibility. And I like to put an asterisk there. It's a governance responsibility. It's not an HR activity. And I will talk about that in a few minutes. But this is really about boards and the support that they give the organization. So the first thing is the reality that they face. Every job ends in a transition. And I also want to put a little asterisk in there and say it's not just the job that's a transition, it's a transition for the entire organization. The staff, not just the executive, not just the board, but when a transition occurs, it affects everything. It's, so there's the transition. It's just a matter of, and it's going to happen, when, how well we handle things moving ahead. So it is literally one of the board's most critical responsibilities, and it's also the least understood. Because most executive transitions are infrequent, and I say most in the hopes that, your executives are long-term and they stay for a while, but these days, job tenures are getting shorter. But so most of the time they're infrequent. The boards often treat succession as kind of an episodic event. And it's really, like I said at the beginning, a core governance responsibility. Nearly 2/3 of nonprofit CEOs tend to lack confidence in their board's ability to choose the right successor. Executive transitions are indeed a watershed moment. It's hard to calculate the impact that it has on the mission, on the culture, on sustainability. And by sustainability, we're also talking about who are your donors, who are your funders, what's going to happen if, funders are giving money just to a CEO or a name. It really is a large impact that is oftentimes not even thought of or calculated. So it's also complicated. There's many, many steps. We're going to try and make it as simple as possible today. But there are tools that can be provided, and the board needs to pick those tools up, and they need to also have a proper mindset on how to use those tools. Underneath every transition, there's a natural, human and organizational process. The process yields better results when it is understood and managed. I'm not going to dive into too much about that. So it is hard. It's hard. One of the whys is also that it's hard. It's not routine. Oftentimes it's emotionally charged. It really depends on why the job is available or the succession needs to happen. Sometimes people die. Sometimes long-term founders leave and people are attached. There's so many emotions that can go into something like this. And then the staff, the trusted leader leaves, or, they wonder who's going to right the ship, or is it going to be the same environment? Is the culture going to shift? So the roles themselves are very context dependent, and they aren't all cookie cutter. It really depends on your missionary. It really depends on if you're an association versus a, service provider. There's multiple kinds of nonprofits, as all of you know who are here. And there's a different context for each position or each position as it becomes available. Unfortunately, a lot of boards tend to fall back onto what we call the replacement mentality. It's really a mindset that is, we got to get this done. What's going to happen to the organization while we don't have a new CEO or something along those lines. And we like to find ways to take the pressure off, because this really is a critical time for the organization. So one way that we do that is through reframing the work. As I said earlier at the very beginning, this is not just a human resources activity. In fact, it should not be a human resources activity or left solely up to internal staff, because it is inappropriate to have a chief human resources officer hire their boss. So I want to highlight that, because a lot of organizations say, we can just do this ourselves and handle it internally. The board absolutely has to be involved. So that's one thing. So governance and the system is in place that we're going to be talking about today, because we want to ensure that there's continuity. We want to ensure that there's readiness, that people understand, what they're getting ready to take on. And we also want to help people understand that there is a certain type of leadership, that mindset that's needed in order to have a full transition be successful.
Yeah. one insert one housekeeping piece here. We've made this slide deck intentionally dense with text so that you can have a resource that you can refer to in the future, and also help help you all first of all remember what what was said here and what was underscored, what was important, but also that you can share it with your board and help them catch the wave, so to speak. So we're going to shift gears here and we're going to get into the timeline, the tools, the people, and the roles. We wanted to give you something, a visual that you could use to kind of provide some, I guess in the education world, they refer to it as mental scaffolding, that you can actually start to hang these ideas off of. And so that's going to be the role of the timeline. So first of all, though, let's talk about people and roles, because oftentimes folks come into this with a mindset, the executives say to us, oh, it's the board's responsibility. I'm out of the picture. I've given them my notice, and I'm done. We've had board members say, oh, we want the departing executive to run it. They know best, what the organization needs, which is probably true, but it's a board's responsibility and they need to know who they hired, why they hired that person. They've got to get their hands dirty. So when it comes to people and roles overall, obviously the board is, setting the policy. We're going to talk about a policy coming up here and providing that oversight and accountability. They need to make the hiring decision. They need to understand who they're hiring, why they're hiring that person, what they want that person to do once they get on board, and obviously ensuring leadership continuity and readiness. It's all about the organization's continuity and the continuity of its mission impact. Now, that said, the departing executive, particularly in retirement situations, and what we're discussing here, there are different, transition types. I've identified 7 of them in a recent article of transition types, messy departures, long-term executives, so forth. But the departing executive, under good circumstances, assuming it's a retirement or they're leaving on good terms, should have a role in this because they do have a deep knowledge of the organization and, can have a role in preparing the organization and the leadership team to work effectively with their successor. In a recent article, I really outlined that there are 3 jobs for the departing executive. One is, of course, to run or lead the organization, but also the 2 other jobs are to prepare the organization to work effectively with their successor and to prepare themselves to leave well and, enter that next chapter of life. And so it's a very rich and a very emotional time for the executive, but they do indeed have a role to play here. And obviously, there's some shared roles here in terms of, helping the staff, communicating with the staff, being careful about the announcement process, and a big part of it is managing stakeholders' expectations. And there's lots of different permutations of that. So a little bit about people and roles, and really want to leave you with the idea that yes, the board needs to take key responsibility for this through their committee, but the departing executive, they're departing on good terms, should have a role as well. Others that are involved, there's a lot of interest and potential involvement in terms of other stakeholders. Obviously, you've got your succession, or my preference is to refer to it as a succession or transition committee. I'm really committed to squashing the term search committee because search is such a narrow piece of this broad, sweeping activity that the organization engages in. Obviously, the incoming executive is going to have a role, particularly when we get into the discussion about onboarding and integration. Uh, the management team, and this is where, you really want your board to be clear about, what kind of involvement organizations are going to have. And it really ranges widely from, I've had organizations where, we had to kind of you know, do some real work, therapy work with the board to get them to see that they really needed to at least interview the staff and get the staff involved because they are one of the key stakeholders. And I've had others, one of my organizations I have done a couple transitions with, that's the benefit of being, having a little gray hairs. I've had people we've placed early in my career are actually retiring, and I'm working with the follow up. And one of the organizations I worked with was had a workplace democracy policy in the organization, and it was almost like, well, what part of this decision does the board need to make? Because we really know best, the staff knows best. So it really, it's coming to some balance of those two polarities and really making sure that you're engaging the management team and the broader staff. Designated backup, we're going to talk about that when we get into the succession essentials. Consultants and advisors, oftentimes boards really don't think about that until they run into a problem. But that's something that, particularly if we're doing succession essentials, we're doing that planning work ahead of time. We're starting to distinguish, really how capable the organization is, its resource picture, and if it's going to be able to engage some outside advisors, or maybe get those people onto the board, people who have had experience with transitions. Wonderful thing about more time is it gives you more options. And community partners and stakeholders, you may want to touch base with them. So really, I hope you're getting the message here that when you have an executive transition, it's not just a transition for the board or a very narrow position. It's a transition that involves the entire organization and maybe even extends beyond that. Your executives oftentimes are involved in other, social service activities or, networks or, and they're not just leaders for the organization. I think the point is not just leaders for your organization, but they're leaders for the community, a movement, so forth. So we're going to talk now, shift gears here. We've talked a little bit about the people and tried to clarify, that there are, broader engagement is needed here. And we're going to talk about the four phases here. And this graphic lays out really what we think are the four phases of sustain, prepare, search and select, onboard, and integrate, or onboard and support. And there's a little tiny timeline under that. Our notion is begin sustainability work at least 2 to 3 years ahead of the if of the planned departure of the executive. Again, we're assuming best case scenario because we really want to do is encourage you to do the kind of planning where it is best case scenario and not, some emergency transition. So 2 to 3 years ahead of it, getting into the sustainability work. And we're going to go into each of these phases in a moment here. 6 to 12 months, you're starting to get closer to that departure date, planned departure date. And that's really where you're getting into the preparation, the search and select, and then onboarding support. This is an area where organizations, boards oftentimes really just drop the ball on it. They think their job's done once they've made the hiring decision and the executive has signed on the dotted line. And what we're going to point out is that there's really another year's worth of work there, of relationship building, of crafting. You've hired for a good fit. There's a lot of work that the executive and the team needs to do to craft that fit and to where it really fits hand in glove with the organization. So those are the four, kind of an overview of the four phases. I'm going to talk about sustain and then phase, and then Ginna's going to pick up on the the next three phases. So each of these phases has a governance question related to it. And what we're really asking you to ask in the sustain phase, that 2 to 3 years ahead of a transition, or really any time in your organization, is what are our sustainability challenges? And oftentimes boards think, or folks think that, when you talk about nonprofit sustainability, we immediately go to finances. And my point is that, finances is a lagging indicator of the health of the organization. What you need to do is get in front of that and take a look at have you got strong business fundamentals in place here? And we'll talk about sustainability in a little bit more depth, but I really want to underscore that idea that it's not just finances. Finance is a lagging indicator. You got to get ahead of that and look at those organizational fundamentals. And really, the time frame for this is ongoing before and after the transition. In fact, Jen and I were planning the session. She looked at the timeline I put together with sustain out here in the front and said, "No, that belongs after the onboarding process." And I totally agree with her. It should be an ongoing piece here. So obviously what we're looking for is an organization that's strong and it's got good, strong business fundamentals in place, and that there's clarity on the part of the board about how to handle unexpected absences of the CEO. Jen pointed out that there are all sorts of circumstances that cause, emergency departures. I remember one organization that's sticking in my mind. We were doing placements of interim executives for one of the statewide associations of nonprofits, and so I was interviewing, meeting with the board of this organization. It so happened that the executive director, she was in her mid-40s. She went in for outpatient surgery on her foot. How dangerous is that? Unfortunately, she had a stroke, was incapacitated, and they're asking me, what are we going to do? And they didn't have any kind of succession plan. They didn't have a backup plan, and so we were, challenged with bringing in an interim. So, life is funny, and life is full of unexpected circumstances, and so succession essentials and paying attention to sustainability can really help. At least, give you a game plan for, when those black swans show up. And then the departing executive, clarity about their role. So again, we talked about the board's focus and the departing executive's focus. Really, under good circumstances, should be a partnership. And here I want to really start to call out the tools that are involved. And again, once we talk through the timeline here, the framework, the 4 phases, we're going to get into the tools in a little bit more depth. But we're going to first of all talk about succession essentials, which is a board adopted succession policy and executive backup plan. We're going to talk about leader development and how you can use what's called the 70-20-10 framework. 70%, and this really tracks how adults actually learn to become leaders. About 70% is through experiences, and about 20% is through relationships. Could be a mentor relationship. It could be an informal mentorship. It could be examples that gosh, I really think that executive is really doing a great job on that, leading that community organization. Want to learn more about that, or it might be like, oh boy, that's an example of how not to lead. So it could be both positive and negative examples. And then departure defined, or exit planning, really a framework with multiple plans where you're going to leave at a certain point, and that drives the preparation for the organization. And then finally, sustainability planning. And this could be incorporated into your strategic planning process, but basically the idea here is to assess and strengthen the organization's fundamentals, and we've identified 6 of them we're going to talk about in the upcoming discussion on that.
Okay. All right. So phase 2, prepare. One of the things that I wanted to say, in fact, I should go back to, I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh, in terms of succession planning, 2 to 3 years might seem a little bit excessive, but if your organization goes through a regular strategic planning process for like a 3 or a 5-year plan, one thing that is often missing is the idea or the thought about succession planning. Succession planning should absolutely be a part of any 3 to 5 year succession, 3 to 5 year strategic plan. And people don't do it. It's not even a thought. So I just wanted to throw that in there as a little add-on to what Don was just sharing. Now, the phase 2 prepare phase, it really is the highest leverage. It's the heaviest lift. It's not just focusing on the search and the select. You have to do the preparation, what I call in my work, I call it like the pre-work, or so you're looking at, what does the position look like now? What do we want it to look like? What are the priorities for this position? As much preparation as you can go through. Is there someone internal that's obvious that could be, if you don't have a succession plan in place, is there someone in the organization that could be obvious, or maybe serve as an interim because they've been around long enough to know kind of the ins and the outs, that puts something in place so that you can prepare, you can continue to prepare. Making sure that the governance committee is thinking about, are we search ready? Are we successor ready? Do we have the clear profile like I was just discussing? What are our priorities? What do we want this position to look like? Oftentimes there's organizations, if it's a long-term executive, organizations have had someone there for 10, 15 years, but the organization doesn't look the same as it was at the beginning of the 10 or 15 years. It looks very different. So priorities really can shift. It's not a plug and play. It's not a replacement mentality with that. Time frame for doing this part of the work is 6 to 12 months ahead of time. And the outcome that we're looking for is that the organization, particularly the staff, the board, everyone, stakeholders, both internal and external to the organization, that everybody's ready to kind of launch into this CEO next phase, which is the search and select phase. Okay, so I'm still talking about the prepare phase because I forgot to say that there's a board focus versus a departing executive focus. The board focus is making sure what we were just talking about is there's a mandate, there's an understanding of what the expectations are. Is the organization ready? Is the board ready to govern through a transition? The departing executive, and Dawn mentioned some of this earlier, the departing executive is part of the prepare phase and part of, hopefully, if they're sticking around, the search and select phase. But the departing executive is really crucial during this time in the best case scenario. They go through and make sure where all the financials are, where all this is, what are the things that they're going to be handing out. In fact, Dawn is providing a checklist that I actually use, and it is a handoff checklist, and it's extensive. And it goes through, where all these documents are, what is this, what is that, and it's fantastic. Are there any legacy issues? Are there any we're going to talk a little bit about this in a minute too, is any skeletons in the closet, anything that needs to be unearthed and understood in terms of a challenge that the organization might face during a transition process. Executive transition management is a tool, and Dawn is providing the 6 tasks that exist for a successful transition. Those will be handed out as well. Or included. I don't know, Don, are you including them in the one pager, or those are going to be separate?
Yeah, on the you're gonna get a resource, a 1-page resource sheet that has some links to it, and so I'm going to making two books that Brittany mentioned available to you gratis, and then there's also some links to some other resources that we think are useful. But yeah, so the checklist and all that stuff will be part of those books.
Perfect. So I mentioned this a second ago, the skeletons in the closet. Whatever they are, whatever they might be, they need to be addressed well before you would launch into any kind of a search. You don't want a new leader to be a problem. Yes.
Can I insert something here that really
Absolutely.
what we're looking at in terms of legacy issues is anything that might blunt or the incoming executives or if the performance, or if it's something that would shock them, make sure that you're identifying these and either addressing them before the change takes place, or they, put them into a solution track and they become part of the new executives' priorities. But, don't, kind of like shock them with, with these surprise things. And that's really one of the things that we're looking at in terms of the legacy issues. And that's, I think, where an outside advisor can be helpful to you in terms of doing an organizational assessment, because, you could have the notion of, well, this is just how we roll as an organization. And someone coming in would, be like bewildered by by that. And so it's kind of getting that sorted out and getting things put into context where there's actually some solutions that can be had, and it's not shocking, folks. I'm sorry, Ginna, I just wanted
Totally fine. Actually, you hit on something that I was going to say is, one of the things that you also need to be sure to do is if you're going to use an outside consultant or an advisor to work with you, you absolutely need to reveal those things to them as well. You don't want to surprise your consultant or your advisor any more than you want to surprise the incoming executive. It literally can just be complete failure. We've seen it happen. I was talking earlier about the 12 to 18 month priorities. What are the priorities of the incoming position? So it's really looking at the CEO position as it exists now, updating whatever their job description was, unpacking what the responsibilities are. Are there things that are no longer necessary? Is there a program that's not working anymore? Is there a donor that will leave, when this person exits the organization? So you kind of have to unpack all of that. You kind of have to look at everything. And then you also need to make decisions based on your mission and your values about what the job looks like for the next 5 to 10 years. What do you want to see? Is it achievable? Is it doable? So you're refitting, you're unpacking, you're refitting, and then you're kind of calibrating based on that for how you're going to step into the future. One of the things that I always say to search clients, transition clients, is we are not trying to replace the CEO or fill the shoes of the previous CEO. When those shoes will walk out of the building with the CEO. What we're doing is trying to create another pair of shoes that a new person can step into and walk the organization into the future. The last piece of this is engaging a committee. The board they all need to look at each other, consider the bench strength actually of the board, and kind of identify who would be sitting on a transition committee or who would be sitting on a succession committee.
Great.
All right. Search and select. I like that. I teased Dawn actually when we were doing preparation. I was like, ooh, disciplined process. That sounds very rigorous and and bossy. But you know what? The longer I thought about it, since this is what I do, and as was mentioned when Brittany was introducing us, I have done nearly 600 searches in the nonprofit sector. And if it isn't a disciplined process, it's generally not going to succeed. So I relented and said, yes, we need to keep that word in there. I was trying to figure out a different word, but anyway. So during search and select, hopefully the board has, selected a robust committee, people that have varying interests or varying backgrounds. you want your boards to have, like I said earlier, bench strength. You know, you want people to understand human resources, or people who understand the fundraising aspects or the operations aspects, et cetera. Having the board self-select a transition committee is often, well, it's not just often the board. So we talked about this, Dawn and I talked about this a little bit too. Sometimes there will be a stakeholder or someone outside the organization that absolutely makes sense to bring them in to be part of a transition committee or even the succession planning committee. I am actually working on a search right now where it is a former board member, but also a former major donor. And she has been sitting in on our initial transition committee calls and Zooms and, you know, giving input on the history because she's been around the organization for 35 or 40 years. So I did want to say that it's not just the board. Sometimes those committees can contain someone from outside. One of the things I really want to stress here is if you have not done inherent bias training at all, I would highly suggest if you're going to sit on any kind, a succession, a transition committee, a strategic planning committee, I highly suggest that you find an inherent bias training that you can put yourself through. It will enable you to recognize where your thought processes end and where they should be continuing. Also, it helps to avoid any shortcuts. So we don't need to do that. Yes, you do. There are multiple steps and they're in order for a reason. So then there's the departing executive. The departing executive, once again, we're kind of talking in best case scenarios. There are definitely emergencies and things like that. But in best case scenarios, the departing executive is part of the process. We do not recommend that they sit on the transition committee at all. What we do recommend is that they take a look at the job description once it's been developed. You know, say maybe you want to add this, maybe you don't. Being a part of the process, but not being in charge of the process. I often have the departing executive meet a finalist and sit in and have a conversation with finalists and kind of give their impressions, but they aren't a voting member. We don't recommend that. It's just literally not about them controlling it. Participating, absolutely. And then this checklist also comes in here that I was just talking about a second ago. Ensuring that the organization is ready, ensuring that there is all the information that an incoming executive would need, ensuring there's all the information that the board will need to help the incoming executive succeed going forward in the position. The tools, again, there's the ETM, as I like to call it, and then there's going to be an onboarding and an integration plan, and we will outline those in a little bit. Okay, so onboarding, as I am particular about onboarding. So large organizations, even small ones, oftentimes have what they consider to be a typical onboarding. You know, you orient someone to the organization and its history. You orient them towards the core values of the organization. You orient them towards the mission and maybe how it's shifted or changed over time. And then the governance committee or the governance responsibility of the board is really looking at all of these things and figuring out, is this going to help this new executive succeed? Is there something else that we need to add into that? Is there something else that we need to consider because now we've grown, or now there are more grants and things to track, like whatever it might be, it needs to be considered in this kind of in this framework. It usually lasts, I prefer for it to go up to 18 months, but there definitely should be a 1-year budget cycle of the CEO's tenure where you're checking in on everything. Maybe you've created some KPIs, or maybe you've created some goals and contracted on what those are supposed to look like. And you check in regularly and make sure that those things are happening. If they need support, if they need professional development, if they need other, resources, make sure that you have them for them, make them available. One of the things that I do with my clients, I actually have what I call an end phase, and that is I offer pro bono onboarding support should they need it, because I know there are a lot of smaller organizations on here. Those kinds of help, that kind of help is available. And then I also offer coaching. I'm also an executive coach, and I offer coaching. I make sure that I'm calling the first month, the second month, checking on the board chair and the new executive. Any kind of support that can be provided to make this successful is obviously something we highly recommend. So the board focus on the onboarding piece. There have to be realistic expectations, kind of what I was saying a second ago around the contracting. What are the goals? What is the role looking like? What are the expectations of that role? And then offering feedback and support. The incoming executive and the departing executive are kind of involved in this, involved in focusing on the handoffs and things like that. The outgoing executive can actually be very helpful in ensuring that there's some sort of a structure to the onboarding process to be sure that this incoming executive will successfully be integrated into the organization. Having conversations around, what are the pain points? What are some things that you could expect from different employees, things like that. You really want to integrate the incoming executive, not just orient them towards the organization. So, pitfalls, they're around. We've talked about some of this already, but the replacement mentality. There's also something we refer to as the plug and play mentality. You are not just replacing someone. It's the little scenario that I talked about with regarding the shoes. You're not trying to replace somebody who's already there. It's not possible. What you're trying to do is create what the position and what the organization is looking forward towards, so that the role can be crafted for that person to step into what's next. Rushing, trying to cut out any part of the process because you've got this fixed timeline in your mind of it has to be this and we have to have it at that point. They need to be, hired before our next conference. Well, if the timeline is too short, they may not be hired before that next conference. So anxiety, pressure, any of those kinds of things that are a little bit on the unrealistic side, causing you to rush, it never works. Plug and play, we discussed. Sink or swim. Yeah, sink or swim is, you've heard us say the word onboarding, I don't know, 75,000 times already since we've been here. And this means basically you're not providing onboarding. You're not giving them some structure, some understanding, some training, anything like that. So sink or swim is also a mentality. It's something that will cause a transition to fail. And then unrealistic expectations in early performance. A 30, 60, 90 can be created. I think it needs to be created by the incoming executive alongside the board to make sure that things are in alignment so that it's not unrealistic goals and things that can't be attained. So why do boards fall into these traps? Limited or no experience with executive transitions. There's the emotional side to a long-term executive departing the organization. It creates a sense of urgency. Everything needs to be kind of kept in check with regards to pushing things along too quickly because there's anxiety around it. And then a lack of shared frameworks and tools. Boards need to be equipped to know how to do this, just like an incoming executive needs to be equipped to know how to do the job. There are plenty of tools out there, and we intend to share some of them with you here today. I love this. There aren't mistakes made by bad boards. There are mistakes made by unprepared boards. And we've focused on preparedness plenty.
Yeah. Great.
I think you're up.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the shift gears here and talk about the tools. But let me take a moment here and see if there are any questions at this point. We've talked about the time frame, and hopefully we've impressed upon you that more time gives you more options, and that it is really striving to have the best case scenario with your transition. And we're going to talk about tools that support that. But any questions that coming up at this point? Brittany, do we have anything in the chat?
Not yet, but you are more than welcome if you have a question to unmute, or you are more than welcome to type them in the chat.
Well, while we're waiting for folks to chime in on this, why don't we go ahead and start talking about the tool set here. And so the first up, what we wanted to impress upon you is what we call succession essentials. And we named it very deliberately. We call it succession essentials because we think it's the essential tools that every organization, every nonprofit should have in place. And basically, the idea here is that this is simple. It's just two documents, but the preparation of those documents is also an important part of the outcome here. And it's a succession policy, a board adopted policy that defines how the board will handle short-term absences and also permanent transitions. So, the board has one employee, and that's the executive director. And so you're really framing up how the board is going to adapt that. The value of this is yes, on one level, it gives you an insurance policy, but the preparation of this really helps the board, understand the breadth of what we've been talking about here, that, what transitions involved. And it also gives you an opportunity, once you put that on your board calendar rotation, to review, annually. It refreshes people's memories that, you got new board members coming on all the time. This is calling attention to the fact that we have done this. We have put this policy in place, and this is a board adopted policy. And this is going to help us, if we have an unexpected absence or if there's going to be a permanent transition here. And the second piece of it is an executive backup plan. And basically, I think of this as really, the board should be aware of the executive's backup plan, but they don't necessarily need to approve it. The policy they approve. But the backup plan, I think of it more as an agreement between two individuals, the executive and the person that's providing, or persons that are providing the backup. And the idea here is that you really want to spell out what business as usual looks like, and that ensure that there's a designated backup who's been cross-trained to step in and provide that business as usual backup in the executive's absence. It's something that every organization should have in place. And in terms of the ownership, as I pointed out, it's the board that is responsible for the policy, and the executive usually does the backup plan. Again, boards should be aware of the backup plan, who's providing the backup, because obviously if the executive's absence, they need to know who to turn to on this, but it's not something that necessarily that they need to approve. The second tool that we'd like, and it also should say that we're going to give you this on the one-page resource sheet. There's a link to a free video course that I did on the backup plans. There's number one. Number two, there's a printed guide in there that walks you through it step by step. And number three, there are templates, plug and play, cut and paste templates that I've annotated with various things, various places where you want to fill in the blanks. So we've tried to make it as painless and easy as possible to put this in place. And again, that's free to you. It's going to be on the link is going to be on that one pager that Brittany's going to send to you. The second tool we want to talk about is and it really is kind of two tools kind of in partnership with each other, and that's exit and departure defined planning. I mentioned earlier that departure defined planning is really where it's sometimes it's called departure led planning, where the executive knows they're going to retire or planning to retire, July of whatever year. And so you've got a date on the calendar, and now you can start to plan towards that date and start kicking in our timeline process here. And it really is an opportunity to prepare the organization, the role, and the people for that eventual transition. I can't impress upon you enough that more time gives you more options. And so the farther out that you can start on this, the better off you are. But basically, the idea is to make sure that, people, the organization, people, and the job or successor ready, and that you've minimized the legacy issues that we talked about earlier. It also shifts the executive's role or their stance within the organization from lame duck to more of somebody that's still guiding the plane down the runway here. And so it kind of makes that kind of shift. So the ownership, should be board and executive aware, or board awareness about and support here, and maybe some transition committee involvement. Again, departure defined is more about the organization, and it should be part of the committee's work and the board's interest. The executive exit planning is more the executive's personal preparation. I mentioned earlier that in my mind, there are three jobs for the departing executive. One is to lead the organization. Another is to, help prepare the organization for the eventual transition. But also, the third job is to prepare themselves for a smooth exit and that personal planning work. And so I think that's probably all there is to say about that. Departure defined planning. It's a great tool for, getting the organization ready. And I shouldn't call it a tool. It's actually a collection of plans that are really most relevant for your organization. For example, if your strategic plan has run out, you may want to make sure, or not may want to make sure, you should make sure that you've got some runway in front of it, at least a year's worth of runway for the new executive while they're getting up to speed and ramping up into the organization, so they're not immediately thrust into strategic planning. In fact, that's why I underscore the idea of a year, because it takes an executive at least 6 months, to get their sea legs under them before they're really ready to do strategic planning. And John Gabarro's research at Harvard found it's more like a year that for that to take place. So, you want to make sure that you've got some runway on your strategic plan. So that might be one of the things that you're doing. Uh, and it really just depends on the organization. One executive comes to mind. I was working, this was a group in Silicon Valley, and I was talking with the executive about, he was a departure defined situation. And talking with the executive about what they needed to do to get the organization really ready before they be, totally comfortable handing it off to the successor. Is there really something that's a sticking point for you? And the executive kind of hemmed and hawed, and he said, "Well, I really want to fire so and so." Like, whoa, this is big stuff. And so getting explored it with him, and basically, long story short, this person just really was a poor cultural fit, and she was in a pivotal role, customer facing role for the organization, and he was right, and that was a big gulp. So yours may be a little bit more less significant than that, but it really is asking the question, is our organization successor ready, and what else can we do to make sure that the person that we hire really excels. If you look at the data out there in the business world, 40% executives are fired or forced out in their first 18 months on the job, which I think is just terrible statistic. When Jen and I worked together for 20 years, and we were part of a company called Transition Guides. And we were meticulous about tracking our what we called our 3-year stick rate. We figured that an organization really needed to get 3 years of good work out of an executive in order to pay for their our expense of this expense of hiring an outside consultant to guide them. And we were very proud of the fact that we were in the upper 90s for our stick rate. It dipped a little bit during the 2008 economic turndown, but it never got below the mid 80s. And we were very concerned about that because we thought that really, that was our reason for being, is make sure that this person not only is hired, but that they excel in the role. So just really want to underscore for you, I hope you get the message here that really what we're talking about here is, a putting things into a success track. So I'm going to turn it over to Jenna now about leader development planning.
And I'm kind of picking up really on some things that Don was already referring to here. But one of the things I want to point out about leader development planning is it's not just about planning for internal options. It's not just about looking at the bench strength of the organization that exists there. Leader development is also about developing the current executive to know how to look at and view the internal options. There's tons of professional development opportunities out there. There are lots of organizations like the clearinghouses for nonprofits, people that offer trainings and things like that. Are here in the DC area. We have the Center for Nonprofit Advancement. We also have in Maryland, specific Maryland nonprofits, organizations like that offer trainings and advice and cohorts and those kinds of things. And I highly recommend, if you are a CEO or an executive director, that you find a cohort of other CEOs and executive directors to have meetings with once a month, and that you're checking in and what are you doing about this, and how just having a peer group essentially, and that goes for, like I said, the current executive, learning more about how to prepare, how to do the departure defined work if that's needed, looking at who is my emergency person going to be if something should happen to me. So the other piece of that is, and I did a succession, more of an outline structure. It was a framework for a client, and it was just two options. She and I discussed it, and she had what she thought could be an heir apparent, but knew that there were some potential weaknesses in the person's skill set. And we talked about it 2 years or 3 years ahead of time. And, what would the professional development opportunities be for, let's say it's the COO, what are those professional development opportunities? How can you get them trained up in an area maybe that they're not strong in that exists in the CEO role? And then the other thing that I think is important to do for the current executive is find out if those people are interested. Find out if it's in their minds that they would like to possibly step into the CEO role one day. There are a lot of COOs and CFOs that have zero interest in becoming the next executive for the organization. So part of looking at what, building leader capacity and like looking at your internal options is to ask the questions, of the people that are already there. So one of the key ideas behind this is that it's continuous. It's not episodic. I was just saying that, there's professional development opportunities. There's also tune-ups. If you're falling short in an area that you really want to be stronger in, or you're not succeeding in the way that you want to succeed as a current executive, maybe you go out and you find some professional development. Also, offering development to the incoming person. Should you run into any kind of a roadblock or a hiccup, making sure that those opportunities are there for them as well. Offering them to, join a CEO cohort, those kinds of things. There's the 70-20-10 that Don was referring to earlier. And there's exposure, there's experience, and then there is education. I'm big on the development and the education because it helped me. It helped me become a better boss. But the experience is definitely a huge part of it. And that is the executive's responsibility as well as the board's responsibility. Really, I guess it's more board oversight, but it is still the board's responsibility. And as Don mentioned earlier, the framework is 70% of it is experience, learning on the job, stepping into a role and creating it and figuring it out and making it your own. 20% of it is coaching, having a mentor, having a peer cohort, having a board member or two that can help train in certain areas. I am, like I said also earlier, I'm a coach, like looking at those things and figuring out what they are. Is your organization does your organization have a culture of coaching? If it does, I highly suggest that you take advantage of that because it's extremely helpful. And then the 10% is education. Take, any kind of formal courses or reading books, anything like that that can be provided that you can use. And then the takeaway on this is if you are not doing the 70 and 20, you're not building a bench. You're not building bench strength. So those two are definitely the most important. And you really should maybe take a critical look at what you're up to.
Ginna, can I just jump in and point
absolutely.
out that one of the messages here is that 90% of leader development is zero budget and within your control. The 10%, outside education, books, formal courses, that sort of thing. They're important, but you've got a lot of resources and a lot of opportunities. If you just look around, lots of opportunities that are already, under your control that you don't have to pay for. And so I think this is just, a very hopeful message for development. And you know what? Executives come from somewhere. If you're not developing, sometimes people come, will say to us, well, if I develop my people, they'll leave. Well, great. You're going to have, alumni out there because guess what? Somebody else is developing their people for you to hire. And so, and the data is very clear that internal hires fare better. Internal promotions oftentimes fare better than external hires. It doesn't take them as long to get up to speed. And if they're given I should say, if they're given the proper support, it doesn't take them as long to get up to speed. And they also aren't tripped up by one of the number one things why executives fail is cultural mismatch. And presumably these folks are already matched to the culture of the organization.
Okay. So we have a 6-task graphic. I think we mentioned this earlier too. So this is what the board is up to during a transition. This is what they would use to guide their work. It will help them set clear committee roles. It'll help them structure their decision making. It'll help with thoughtful communication. And I am huge on thoughtful communication. Communication during a transition needs to be on the regular and absolutely upfront every step of the process for the staff and for the organization, people who are stakeholders in the organization. They want to know what's going on. They want to feel included. They want to know who their new leader is going to be. They want to know if this person's going to be, somebody that they're going to like, somebody that they're going to be able to grow and maintain, their role or grow and, be promoted. It's a very stressful time, not just for boards. It's a stressful time for everyone in the organization. So thoughtful communication is a big one for me. I actually provide communication details and plans for each step of the process for my transition committees when I do the search. And then you also want to make sure there's some kind of closure with the departing executive. Depending on how long they've been there, whatever it might be, having, cake in the break room, or, if you have a particular conference that's coming up, you allow that conference to be, an homage to them and their work for the organization, and an exciting time to introduce, the new executive coming in. But you want to be sure that whoever departs the organization and and has given, their heart and soul to it. You want to be sure that there is closure for them. And then, as I mentioned, this is all the ownership of the board. So the tasks, regardless of any situation that you're in, these 6 tasks can be a go-to tool. I think they're also included in the information that you're going to have as you leave today. So first task, understand and guide the transition. This hits on many things we've already said. What is the organization successor ready? What are we looking for? Who are we looking for? And then how are we going to do this? What are the steps that are in place for us to guide this transition? Task 2, prepare for leadership change. Getting people, this also deals with communications that I was just talking about. That's why I got hiccuped here for a second. So preparing for the leadership change, that includes, once again, who's doing what, defining things clearly. How are we communicating? How much are we talking about this? How are we going to roll this out? Who are we going to reach out to notify that this is happening? And then during that time, task 3, ensuring leadership continuity. So if the departing executive has already left, finding a strong interim is always suggested. Preferably having an interim that doesn't want to be a candidate is something that I encourage these days, because so many people ask, are there internal candidates? And oftentimes we're not really allowed to say whether there are or there aren't, but people will not apply. Oftentimes they just won't. They think that they're not going to be selected because there's an internal candidate. So if you don't have the departing executive sitting in their seat to ensure leadership continuity, do have a strong interim that's not interested, a professional interim. That's what Don was. Don was a professional interim 3 or 4, 5, 6 times. I can't remember exactly. Five times. And that was his job. He didn't want the job. He wanted to keep the trains running on time and help the organization have some continuity while they were going through a search process. I'm not going to hit on task 4 again, because I've hit on it so much in the last couple minutes. Communicate, communicate, communicate. And in terms of that closure, you want to be sure that it's positive. Obviously, you appreciate the work that someone's done. You acknowledge their accomplishments. You talk about how the organization has changed under their leadership, and you provide them the kudos that they deserve for doing these things for the org and for the mission and for the people that you might be serving. Task 5, search for, select, and hire. Searching involves a search plan. Know where are you going to advertise? Who are you going to reach out to? How are you going to build the pool? And then looking at, I create what's called a North Star document with my clients. It's basically a list of the must-haves versus the preferreds for an incoming executive. It guides the process. It helps guide the interview questions. It guides the scorecards that get built. It just kind of guides everything, and it's a place for everyone to focus. It really helps in selection, because you're using those particular things as your guide to what the person has to have. And honestly, it also makes the hiring process a little bit easier, in my opinion, because you know that you've followed this. You've created this with the board and whoever's going to be on the transition committee, and you've run it by the executive leadership team, making sure that all these things are looked at. Makes the hiring process much easier. And then there's the onboarding piece and making sure that the new executive gets integrated into the organization. Then Don's going to go ahead and expand on that.
Yeah. Since presumably folks on this session are board members and current executives, I'm not going to dwell too much on the incoming executive, but I really want to call attention to this when you get this PowerPoint, and when you're getting to that stage, that this really is an opportunity the post-hire work is so important. It's an opportunity to do what I call job crafting or fit crafting for the new executive. And there are 6 integration tasks that I've identified here that are based on research. This isn't something that, I pulled out of the air. There really is research here behind each of these 6 tasks that executives really need to engage in. But the takeaway message here is onboarding is important. Handoffs are important. It needs to be on the board's radar screen and not a sink or swim situation. So we're going to talk about how to put this system together. So basically, what we put together here is a package that really it works as a system. That succession essentials, the board adopted policy, and the backup plan really opens up the conversation. It starts to build understanding. Yes, it gives you that insurance policy in case you need it, but more importantly, it opens up the dialogue about succession and breaks down this kind of mysterious thing or this thing that we don't really want to talk about because we don't want to give the executives the wrong impression, that sort of thing. Exit planning helps the executive get ready to leave. Departure defined planning, we've talked about, builds the organization's readiness, making sure that the organization, the people, and the job are successor ready. The leader development work expands your options in terms of who to hire and gives you, some potentially really good internal candidates. Transition management, Ginna just talked about, make sure that there's good processes in place. And she mentioned that we're going to be giving you something. There are 2 books that I'm making available to you gratis. One of them is the board source book that I wrote on executive transition management, covers those 6 tasks in depth. So you'll have resources to follow up on. And then onboarding and integration, as we talked about, really enable success after the hire. So Ginna, we're going to talk about what 3 things that the boards can do and the executives can do.
Absolutely. So identifying where your organization is on the timeline that we're providing, and then figuring out how to implement kind of appropriate planning steps from there. Naming a succession committee, making sure, or a transition committee, or a task force. Charge them with developing and refreshing the succession essentials that are going to be provided to you. Taking a good long look at what they need to be doing and how they need to be doing it. Scheduling a board conversation, talking about how you're bringing a sustainability lens to the planning that you're doing, because you're not just looking at what needs to happen right now. You're looking at what needs to happen, for multiple years going forward. The 3 actions that, if you're an executive on here, that you can take, and it doesn't matter what your tenure is. You can figure out where your organization is on the timeline. You can talk to your board. You can encourage them. Ask them to start doing the planning with you or for you, and then consider how you can help. And I know that we have some people who don't have staff on here, but for the ones that do, consider how you can help develop internal succession, looking at who might be there, who might be logical or reasonable to consider if there's an internal candidate or 2. And then beginning departure defined thinking early. And Dawn kind of went over that already. So the one simple first step that we're finishing this on is start the conversation. You do not want a transition to force your conversation. You do not want an executive to leave, or unfortunately, maybe they pass away or anything like that. You don't want to have to find yourself in that position if it's at all possible. So start the conversation now.
Before we go to questions here, I just really want to point out that in terms of smaller organizations, and we've worked with tons of smaller and one person shops, that sort of thing. You can do a lot of this in terms of succession essentials. You may think, well, who's going to provide the backup here? Well, what you can do is clarify what business as usual looks like, and that's going to be spelled out in the templates that are available as part of the succession essentials package we're making available to you. And it really is something that where you can, map that stuff out and then to think about where would you turn for an interim executive. Statewide associations of nonprofits are a good source. Your networks can be a good source. There are plenty of executives out there that are recently retired executives that would love to come in and help an organization during that interim period. And I underscore the retired executives because it's typically the kind of job that you want, somebody that's been there, done that to step into that role. So it's not just the big groups. A lot of this stuff can be adapted to your organization, so you can create your own system that's appropriate for your size, your scale, and so forth. Brittany, do we have questions?
We do not. Again, if you would like to ask a question, you're more than actually we do. Hang on just a second. Laura Ann asked, I really appreciate your time and look forward to looking over the work through the documents. I've been the only employee at our organization for 11 years and we are not succession ready. So Laura Ann, hopefully after this you will be.
Get those succession essentials in place. And, if you need to identify an interim, at least give the board some idea of places they could turn for an interim if you're otherwise not available. If you've won the lottery and run off to Tahiti or something.
And also, our information is going to be provided to you all. If you have questions, if you just want to have a phone conversation and talk about where you are and anything specific, you can certainly reach out to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I just volunteered you, Don. You can reach out to me. I didn't mean to
Definitely reach
volunteer
out to
you.
me.
Yeah, you are.
Give me something to do to keep me out of trouble.
Hi, guys. Don and Ginna, I do have a question. What if you do not have a supportive board or a strong board and you're about to go through this process? What do you do? How do you manage that?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, that is a good one. And honestly, if you have a state association that, is for nonprofits, going to them and finding out, there are board trainings. There are also, information for people who want to redo their boards and how can they. I mean, I actually had one coaching client who fired her entire board. So, there are ways to do these things. I'm not suggesting that. Please don't think that it was necessary in this case. It was absolutely necessary. So there are there's lots of information available. There really is.
Yeah. That's a really good, that's a sticky challenge. I've had any number of experiences with that. But what happens is, I think what my takeaway from Jenna's conversation or point about this is sometimes an outside person can help a board behave a little bit better or help them, get what you've been trying to say to them. For example, you might have a board member from a colleague organization that's gone through a transition and come in and talk to the board, and so that they can kind of get, colleague to colleague kind of transfer of knowledge. Or it might be an outside consultant. One organization that sticks in my mind is a board where they had 22 members on the board. When I interviewed them, about half the board members really didn't want to be there because they were, well, it's just long story short, they're political appointees. And so I read the legislation and came back to them and said, look, you don't have to serve on this board. Here's the actual composition. And so we took the board down from 22 members to 7 with an idea that they would be built back to 15. So there's different ways. So if you want to strategize on that, when you get my email stuff, ping me and we'll have a Zoom or have a phone conversation and we can talk through some options, no meter running, that sort of thing.
Well, Dawn and Ginna, thank you so much for that inspiring program today. For everyone joining us, keep an eye out for an email from me. It'll have a link to the presentation recording and an opportunity to sign up for the Carey Center Nonprofit Affiliate Program if you're not already one. The Carey Center Nonprofit Affiliate Program now serves more than 460 nonprofits across Alabama and beyond, and it is a great way to access educational programs, professional development, and networking opportunities, and membership is completely free. The Carey Center Nonprofit Consultant Directory connects nonprofits with trusted experts in areas such as fundraising, board development, marketing, and strategic planning. Whether you're launching something new or solving a challenge, you can find experienced partners ready to help move your mission forward. Explore the directory and take your organization to the next level. We are also excited to share information about the Carey Center Nonprofit Professional Certificate. This is an online, non-degreed certificate developed in partnership with the Auburn University Office of Professional and Continuing Education and Merit Nonprofit Professional Development. It is an anytime, anywhere micro-learning platform that helps nonprofit professionals strengthen 6 key areas: leading, learning, resource generating, planning, managing, and overseeing. Thank you again for joining us today, and we hope to see you at one of our monthly virtual programs or in person when our nonprofit training series comes to your part of the state. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
You.